today we want to get on to the more sort of the business end. So specifically after that first interview, how are we dealing with candidates when we get further towards an offer stage? And then when the offer is coming, how do we present the offer? How do we follow a process which ensures that that we get this done? And I think, I see so many times, Seb, I see people just thinking when there's a couple of good interviews, it's done and dusted. Like the client's going to do it. They have a process, they have a system. So to kind of start off, why is this such a, without sounding too obvious, why is it important to have a system of how to handle these kind of situations?
Well, I think back to probably not, I think it was probably 2 Octobers ago. And we had just finished a quarter where we had something like $350,000 worth of deals turned down at the offer stage. And that was just something that was incredibly hard to stomach. I think it meant that we went from absolutely smashing our financial target as a business to falling quite short from what we wanted to achieve. And I think that you and I had a moment where we were like, okay, instead of just burying our head in the sand and saying, oh, we got unlucky, we were like, we need to figure out what the hell just happened and make sure it doesn't happen again. So with that, we went to bat and started to think about the process of controlling the offer stage and pre-closing the candidates correctly and all this kind of stuff. And to your point, I think the reason why it's so important, it just kind of was proven in the data. We got control of our offer stages. We built like a system around it. And then next quarter, it was kind of like a real triumphant moment. We closed something like 80 or 85 or 90% of the offers that came through the pipeline. And so it was like the systemization of the way that offers are presented and the control throughout that process that made such a huge difference. And there's so many different ways that you can kind of go about attacking that. But just in terms of your question, why is it important? Well, speaking from experience, it was the difference between, several $100,000 in revenue in just one quarter alone. And I think you're on mute. We'll cut this out.
You're absolutely right. And when you start, you just think, oh, there's a couple of good conversations. I'll just leave it. And then this is kind of what I describe as a 3D lesson. I think every recruiter has to go through this. They kind of think, oh, I'll wing it a little bit. And then they have two or three big offers turned down. And it puts them in that situation where it's just so painful that they actually have to think about the process and how to really truly learn about offer management and how to kind of toe the line between client and candidate. But to start off, Seb, the candidate has been through the first interview. The debrief went well. Let's say they're at second or third or final or whatever it is. In your opinion, how should a recruiter's approach change here? Like, what is the difference between like a first debrief to like a mid to late stage debrief with a candidate? And what kind of signals should you be hoping for here?
Okay, so two different parts, but like how does it change and what we should you be looking for? So let's start with how does it change? Well, I think first and foremost, like when you do an initial interview, very oftentimes as a recruiter, you can say to the candidate, like, this is just an introductory call where you can find out more about the company. You talk to the hiring manager, see if you like them. It's the first date, so to speak. And so like your first interview debrief is more along the lines, you go through your 1 to 10, like how did it go and all this stuff, but you're getting like a first reaction. By the time you get to the later stage interviews, just like from my experience, it should be much more methodical. It should be much more like, okay, we've talked about your aspirations and your pain points very specifically throughout this process. And basically, the last few interviews are just checking the boxes. Like you're reconfirming with different stakeholders that the company and the job solves for your pain points and aspirations in the same way that the first round interview confirmed. And all of the questions and all of the way that that candidate is talking to the client should be framed around like when I joined the company, like how would this look, how would that look, and it's much more sort of visualizing how they would sit in the position versus like an exploratory frame. So if I was to put it into two buckets, the first interview is the most exploratory of all the calls, But the later ones are trying to basically confirm assumptions that the candidate already has about the job. And so I guess that leads to the second part of the question, which is like, what should you be looking for? Well, once you get to the later stage interviews, like the person absolutely has to be talking like a buyer. They have to be talking about like, okay, so when I join the company, like this is how it is going to go. And like, it seems like as a team, these are the things that we're going to be focusing on. If your candidate at the later stage is still talking about the job in like the third person, like, yeah, whoever gets that job, it sounds like they're going to be doing this. That's a huge red flag. So that's what you should be looking for. It's like, are they speaking like a buyer? And tone of voice is also absolutely critical as well. Like, do they seem really excited and like they're asking you more information about their feedback and things like that? Those are a few basic things I'd say, but that's kind of the high level shift, and that's the things I'd be looking for just at a really high level.
Yeah, so much of it comes down to gut feel, doesn't it? Like so much of your experience as a recruiter, or so much of your value as a recruiter, is in your listening. Like, what are they? What's the tone? Like, what are they? Not necessarily what they're saying, but how are they saying it? It's just so important. Um, cool. I think yeah, one of the things that Mark mentioned in one of our Generate playbooks, which is going to go online in the next week or two, is having that emotional connection. So it's not like, it's not necessarily the 1 to 10, or it's, although that's important. And it's not like, you, like, what do you think about the company? None of that. I mean, it's important, sure. But the question is more so, and what you're trying to feel out is like, can you actually see yourself as part of the team? Like, this is a huge decision. Like every job decision is a very, very emotional one. And so the question of can you see yourself as part of the team is really an important one. So, yeah, this can go one or two ways. And if you've done your job well and you've engaged the candidate at every stage and you've pushed them to the next step in the interview process because you think that they are genuinely excited and there's a matchup, you're in a good spot. And best case scenario, we go through, there's an offer, and we can speak about offer in a bit. But sometimes candidates do have hesitations. It's an emotional decision. It's a big decision to make, right? And so there is a fork in the road sometimes at late stage. And so we've spoken about the good path. If you're sensing some kind of hesitation, how are we dealing with this? Or like in your opinion, how have you dealt with this to best effect?
Yeah, I think I just think back to some of the deals that I lost early in my career, and you kind of get thick skin as you grow as a recruiter, but especially early on, like you'll sometimes like try to push out of your mind very clear, like almost non-verbal cues that the person's not going to take the job. So, when a candidate begins to just sound very hesitant, they're like, it seems interesting, but I'm just not really sure. Like you need to immediately quantify how terminal those points are, right? Like if someone says, look, the interview went really, really well, I'm just not 100% sure about how well defined the job responsibilities are for this position, and I think we need to get together and figure that out. Like it's like a discovery question. That's okay. But when the person very clearly has like deep rooted skepticism about the job or the business, I think most recruiters, especially in the early days, because it looks good in the pipeline forecaster, they'll be like, oh, let's just push it through and see if it happens to close. When a candidate at the mid stage begins to get like pretty hesitant, they've already had like, say, call it two conversations. If their tone is like, I'm just not really sure about this, I mean, it's rare that you close those deals. It's very rare. And then also in recruitment, we have rebate periods, right? So I think honestly, it's tough love, but oftentimes you need to be looking at your whole pipeline when it comes to offer management and listening to people's like change in tone. And I think ultimately when you begin to hear those, I just don't, I'm not really it's that kind of energy. Like I'm not really sure about this business. As a recruiter, for me, I've had thick skin. I've had my heart broken too many times. I'm like, let's go back to the pipeline. Like, who else do we have? Who's really bought in? Who really, really wants this job? Because I mean, I'd love to see the statistics, but as I say, I think the moment that somebody starts to get really apprehensive about the company and the job overall, just for no specific reason, it's very hard to turn that around, and it's something that a lot of people
Hmm.
don't want to hear.
Hmm. Yeah. My view on this is you have to always strive to be in a position of control before that conversation. So what I mean by that is that if you do your job correctly, it's not a one horse race. It's usually a three-horse race, especially at the mid to final stages. And any client that says, "Oh, we just want to run with this one candidate and see how it goes," is ultimately a terrible position and puts you in a strategically it makes you strategically worse off. So that's the first thing. So you've always got to strive to be in a place where you have two or three front runners, because the whole way you handle a late stage with a candidate puts you in a position of control, and it puts you in a position of power. But whenever I hear hesitation, the kind of MO you want to take is you need to address it. You can't just stick your head in the sand and think like, oh, well, I hope the next interviewer does their job and alleviates this hesitation. So
Mm.
what I always want to do is just slow down a little bit and just call it out and say something like, hey, look, I can sense some hesitation here. Let's just slow down and let's just talk about it. And we can just talk about what's going on. And what I find is when you lead with questions, usually you can get to the bottom of it. And when you do get to the bottom of it, you can make an assessment of whether this is something material or immaterial, because it could just be sometimes that they're walking away from a little bonus, which hopefully in an initial screen you teased out, but maybe it's something new that's come up. In which case you can get ahead of it. So I think this sort of two forks in the road is quite important. But at the end of the day, your job as a recruiter is to get to the no as quickly as possible, right? Because if you drag a candidate through and you just have that gut feeling like it's not going to work out, ultimately it's going to turn out badly and it's going to signal to the client that you're not very good at your job.
Mm. I think also like just one thing that you said that kind of sparks like an additional thought. I think a good thing to do as a recruiter is to really escalate the process early on. Like after the first interview, even if it's not true, I would say things like, look, this company is very intentional about the way they interview, and there's a good chance that like they might push through the next couple of rounds and put an offer in front of you very quickly. And like, why do you do that? Well, first of all, it's going to make the candidate really engaged, and they're going to be like, oh, okay, well, let's get this going. I'm really excited to see where this goes. And you get them like on the edge of their seats, which is exactly where you want the candidate. But then also it helps them like mentally accelerate all the things that need to fall into place for them to take the job. If you say to them like, hey, look, Charlie, like we could have an offer next week, then they're like, okay, well, hang on. This is a good time to speak about this. I have this mystery sign-on bonus that I got, which I need to pay back, which I didn't tell you about before. Or like, oh, actually, I need to tell you about this, like, 7-week trip I'm doing to Antarctica, like in 3 weeks' time. That like, and like the thing is, unfortunately, even if you're perfect, your candidate from time to time will just withhold information because to them they're like, well, I don't want to tell the recruiter that just in case it kills the deal. So what you want to do really as a recruiter, and this goes for every step, is you want to just accelerate the hell out of the candidate's frame of mind early and often so that you don't have this huge, great big showdown at the offer stage. The offer should just be like a formality. So that's the
Yeah.
other thing that I'd say. And the mid-stage interview should reflect that level of escalation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, I think for any recruiter, a learning lesson is well, not a learning lesson, but I think yeah, even now, like even in my most successful years, you feel like you have handles on situations, but then recruiting has a funny way of bringing you back down to earth, and people that you trusted and you felt had a really good relationship with are incredibly unpredictable. So, what are your thoughts on, or how would you handle situations where your candidate they just can't commit? Like, they're just like, oh, Seb, give me a week. I just need to like think stuff over. Or maybe you're at offer stage and they have the offer. And they're like, oh yeah, I'll just give me a week and then I'll like come to a decision, yes or no. I think this is a really critical point in in the process, because obviously you want the deal to be done, but it's really, really important again to signal to the client side that you're a professional, you're process driven, you have a handle on things, and you're the one who makes decisions and you're the one who takes control. So if you just have candidates that are just tricky. What's like your process? How are you handling those conversations?
Yeah, so this is really challenging, but the reality is if you want to be a good recruiter, you have to be a control freak and you have to have total control of every single deal that you're working on. And as soon as and here's what's going to happen, by the way, especially if it's a client that doesn't hire very often, the candidate's going to say, "Oh, this is such a big decision. I really need to think about it for a week and get back to you, or 2 weeks." And then the client will go, "Oh, yeah, like, oh, we really like Jeremy. Let's give him the space. And like, we want him to really think this through." Like, disaster. Your deal's dead. You've lost control. And now we're just operating with, nothing but crossing your fingers and hoping the deal closes. So if the candidate says, "I need to think about this for 2 weeks, you know, or a week or whatever it is," you need to then start introducing ideas that help you figure out how serious they are. So if you were to say, Charlie, you're the candidate, "Hey Seb, I need to think about this for a week." First of all, if you've qualified the job properly, you have a very specific idea of like the urgency and the time frame that this person is looking to hire this person on, and also how much money it's going to cost the business if they don't hire it. So what I would then say to the candidate is like, "Look, I respect that you want to think about this for a week. I get it. It's a big decision. But here's the reality. I've been hired by this business to fill this seat. And this seat is critical for reasons X, Y, and Z. And if you say, I need to wait about this for a week or think about this for a week, now everybody who's also wants this job, the pipeline of candidates, are now going to be in limbo. We're going to lose out on some of that talent. And there's a situation where we fast forward to 2 weeks, you decide you don't want the job. And now this pipeline that I've worked very hard to build is disengaged or off the market. The client's got an empty seat. I'm on the line. It costs them a ton of money and all of this kind of stuff. So, with respect to your timeline, you know, there's two things that can happen. You can either tell me right now that you are thinking very seriously about this job, you're leaning towards accepting it, and there are some very specific elements that you're trying to check off, like, I'm going through my contract to figure out what the sign-on bonus thing, my end of year bonus looks like, or how I'm going to dish off responsibilities to the rest of my team. That's one thing. But if it's like, "Oh, I just don't know, I need to think about it," then what you need to likely respond with is, "Okay, I understand that. Just so you know, this is a critical position for the company. I'm going to advise them to start interviewing more seriously the other candidates that we have in play, because we simply cannot risk to just let this process slide for a week and a half. It's going to cost the company tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue. So that's what I'm going to do, unless you tell me no, unless you tell me that you're ready to verbally accept. And this week delay is just dotting your I's and crossing your T's." Two very different things. But the bottom line is, you never want to relinquish control, even if the person is like somebody who, is extremely motivated by status and controlling their destiny and all this kind of stuff. You were hired by the client to fill the job. They're going to pay you $50,000 to do this. And by relinquishing control of the pipeline, you're relinquishing control of the end result and therefore your service. So I know that was a long answer, but I think it's really critical that you play your game well, regardless of what's on the other side of the field.
Yeah, I think it's professional courtesy as well. If a client has spent 3, 4 weeks getting to know you and all of a sudden you're pushing things out a week, it doesn't look, first of all, it doesn't look good. It's not very professional. And it's a signal to them that perhaps you're not that serious. And they could, of course, pull the offer. The whole thing can turn sour. So yeah, I'm not going to repeat too much of what you said, but I agree.
I'll add on as well. When you're in a shop, you're at the mall, right? You're at Century City Mall and you go into Nike. No, they don't have a Nike, sadly. It's an Adidas. But anyway, you go into Adidas and you try on a pair of shoes and you say to the shopping assistant, I really like them. I'm gonna go away and think about it. I'm gonna think about it and come back, right? I personally think that your odds of buying those shoes are about the same as a candidate when they say, "Let me think about it." When a candidate says, "Let me think about it for a week," it is the equivalent of the person going into the shop and saying, "Yeah, I quite like them. Let me just do a lap around and I'm going to think about it." I think your odds are about the same.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a good analogy. Yeah, I've just seen it all in recruiting though. Like I've seen I've seen offers rejected. Like I've had an offer rejected and rejected to a client that I've pulled back around, and yeah, we can get into that in a bit. But I've seen it all. So never say never, but gut feel is important. And if we're at late stages and if candidates are delaying and you're not getting to the heart of it really, really quickly and being solutions oriented, then it's probably not going to work out. But yeah, I'm an eternal optimist. I always like to feel I can turn things around until I just hear too much evidence, and then it's just yeah, I feel like it's a waste of time.
I think as well, it's an important transition that occurs. Like this podcast is called The First 90 Days, and it's all about, folks who are entrepreneurial and they're out on their own. Like, I do just think that your muscle to smell bullshit gets stronger and stronger the longer you're an
Mm,
entrepreneur. Because like beforehand, when you've got your base salary, it's like, oh, I hope they take the job. Oh, it's kind of like a bit of banter in the office. Oh, I wonder what's going. But when it's like, okay, $90,000 of my personal earnings is on the line here, and somebody wants to think about it for a week. I mean, you're not just going to
hmm
go to bed every night being like, I hope that Jeremy takes the job. It's like, no, I'm going to rebuild pipeline. I'm going to set very clear timeline guardrails, and I'm going to protect my interests, as a matter of urgency. So, um,
hmm
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, with the office situations and like, there are so many scenarios, and I don't. There's no point going through all of them. There are like, what happens if the candidate's multiple processes? There are so much. But if you have the OM, the kind of philosophy of like taking control, truly wanting the best for the candidate, by the way, if something just clearly makes more sense for them, the money's better, everything's better, like you can't fight it. They're going to make the decision. You can't force them into something they don't want to do. So you got to be an honest broker here as well. But as I say, the general philosophy, taking control, getting to the root of the problem, being solutions oriented, and putting yourself in a position of power. And what I mean by that, just to repeat myself, is giving yourself leverage with other candidates that you have at final stage. You're going to be in a great position because if one candidate dicks you around, you can cut them, you can take control onto the next one. Um,
mm,
okay, one thing I just wanted to cross off is this whole, and I know Seb, everyone's got the way in which they deliver offers, and uh, yeah, there seems to be so many opinions on this. But in terms of how you deliver an offer to make sure, well, your process for delivering an offer to make sure it gets signed, the deal's done, what are the kind of key steps you're going through on the client and candidate side?
yeah. Well, again, like let's just talk about reality. Here's what's going to happen. The client's going to go. I mean, hopefully they've gathered enough respect or you've earned enough respect from them through a process. But here's what's probably going to happen. The client's going to go, thanks for all your help, Seb. But with respect, like we've got our offer, we're ready to present it. We're going to just call the candidate Jeremy. We've gone with it thus far. We're going to present him the offer. I know it's a Thursday today, so we're going to present it to him on Friday, and we're going to give him the weekend to respond to us. And thanks for all your help. We'll take it from here. Again, like you got to be a control freak, and you've got to just do everything that you can to ensure that ultimately the client is deferring to you. Everyone in this process, every stakeholder should be deferring to you. So just know that that's probably coming. And what you want to do, and this is kind of like the cornerstone of our logic with this, is you want to say to them, okay, look, with respect, we present many, many offers every single week. And I can tell you one thing, by presenting an offer on a Friday and letting them think about it over the weekend, you've literally lost all control of the process and you massively diminish your chances of closing this candidate. Why is that? Because humans are adverse to change. And if you're giving them this big scary thing and you're asking to send them off into this meditative state to think about the job and their life and all this kind of stuff, people are going to often choose the more comfortable option, right? And sometimes the more comfortable option is just to delay it and interview at other places. So you must maintain control, and you must say to them, if you give an offer on a Friday and let them think about it over the weekend, you are cooked. So again, how do we keep control? What is the best way to do this? Well, and this can apply to any point during the week. You say to them, look, here's how we're going to present the offer. I am going to give them a verbal offer that is along the exact number that we've talked about throughout this process. I'm going to give them a very tight window to think about the verbal offer, and say like, I want an 100% commitment to that. And then once they've 100% committed to the number, we then present the written. So in short, what this would look like is I'd say, all right, Charlie, great news. I've talked to the team and it looks like they're probably going to give you an offer. And this is even if you have the written offer letter in your hand, by the way. Looks like they're probably going to give you a written an offer. What I want you to do over the weekend, I think they're probably going to come in at $190,000 base with a 20% bonus, as we've talked about the entire time. You've told me that you'd accept that number. But what I want you to do is think about this over the weekend. And on Monday, I want you to tell me yes or no if you are ready to accept that number, 100% ready to go. Now, you might think to yourself, well, haven't you just given the offer over the weekend and let them think about it? The difference is they don't have paperwork, so it's not guaranteed, and you still have all of the leverage. However, if you give them the paperwork, boom, your leverage is completely gone and they're in control and you're cooked. You're now just operating with randomness as a strategy. So if you say to them, look, the numbers are going to look like this, think about it. You come back to you on Monday. They come to you on Monday. They go, yep, I've just thought about it. I will accept those numbers. I'm ready to go. Right. Then you can say, okay, let me talk to the hiring manager. I'll get back to you. And then, of course, 2 hours pass and you come back with a written offer letter and you're like, congratulations, you've got the job. So excited for you. And there's really no way psychologically that they could be like, well, now that I've got the offer, let me think about it. It's like, no, we've just done that. So we're ready to go. Here's what's going to happen. I guess I'll put the question to you, Charlie. What happens when the candidate says, yep, I'm ready to go, but here's the thing. I really need to see the offer letter. And what's in the offer letter is going to like really be the thing that makes me decide whether I want to take this job or not. Like I need to see the offer letter first before I can decide. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, well, I just say like, what do you need to see in the offer letter? Like, what is it? It's an employment letter. You got to make sure they have all the benefits and all the accoutrements and all those things. But really, the offer letter is, it's the salary, the bonus, and any kind of other bonuses. What I tend to do is I'll get it in writing. So I'll say, yeah, well, let me just get that over on an email to you. Just so you know, like we're not going to waste time and get it generated if this is something that you're not going to move forward with. That I just make, do you know what? I make it seem like it's almost out of the question that happens. Like you really think someone's going to give you an offer letter which you're not going to accept? Like, no, that doesn't happen because I don't let it happen in my processes. So those are a few of the things I do. But I think for me, usually they just want to see something concrete, official. And so if I send them an email saying like, hey, this is what the offer, of course, after I've got a pretty good sense that they're going to accept it. If I send them what's actually going to be on the offer letter, usually that's good enough for me.
Yeah. The point is just like you can see the theme through all this. It's like you're never operating with randomness as a strategy or luck. It's like, what do you need to see? What's the timeline? And never give them paperwork or never allow them to control the timeline because, you're being paid to do this job. So you got to do it freaking well.
Yeah. And some clients do want to offer. And I always say, great, that's a really good idea. Before you make that call, just let me run the numbers. Just let me confirm. The worst thing you can do is give an offer that's not going to be accepted. It's my job to make sure it's accepted. Now, I'm pretty sure it will be accepted at X numbers, but I need to make sure because once you've made that offer, they have the control. They might be shopping your offer around. Like strategically, Mr. or Mrs. Client or Miss Client, it puts us in a worse position. And so I think creating using the kind of we language is also important. So you need to you need to signal to them like we're on the same team. We're in this together. We're in the trenches and we're going to get this done. This is the best strategy. And I'll tell you why it's the best strategy because I'm a professional. This is my job. This is what I do. I've done this hundreds of times before and you haven't. So just trust me on this.
Yeah. No, I think you make a good point. Like the whole conversation is very like you must control, you must be a hardo, but like at the same time it's also like okay, you do want to make sure that like they are aware that you're very excited about the prospect of you're very excited at the prospect of them joining the team and adding a lot of value. You basically want to paint the picture like, look, everybody in the room here, me, the company, you, we all want you to be the guy or the girl to place this position, to be the one, right? But we do need to protect the process, So don't be too nice, don't be too mean, but whatever the case, maintain control.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, the offer goes out, the candidate accepts. we're sailing into the sunset. But just the last thing, sometimes they say, "Oh, I need the weekend," or "I need to talk to my husband," or "I need to talk to my wife." Uh, how are you managing this? Bearing in mind that to go through this verbal offer situation, right? You've got them to commit to you, but that they still are pondering on it.
Okay, this one's difficult. Well, here,
I know we've got
yeah.
some strong opinions on this.
Well, here's the thing, right? So you need to be respectful, right? If you just like come in all guns blazing, it's going to come across as disrespectful. But here's a reality that you just need to remind them of. Well, actually, before I even go into this, your significant other is going to have one priority, right? And that's their survival instinct. Okay. So whether it's your husband or your wife, whatever, right? They're going to be interested in one thing. What is your safety professionally, and how much money are you bringing in to help us ultimately thrive as a family? So it's going to be motivated by earnings and safety. Those are the really the only two. I mean, look, you'd like to think, okay, no, your significant other is going to be mainly interested in the sort of creative fulfillment that you're going to have in this job. I think that's bullshit. I think that they're going to be interested in how much are you earning and how much safety do you have in this position. Okay, so what you need to do is bear that in mind and paint the picture quite clearly that, like, look, I know that your spouse might have a very intimate level of detail around like your aspirations and pain points professionally and all this kind of stuff, but they have not been in the room interviewing with this client. They don't know the nuances of the job. They don't know the nuances of the microeconomic circumstances that are driving this search. Like, they just do not have the same level of information about you. And so what you're basically asking is for somebody's opinion who really has absolutely no boots on the ground level of detail around how this might affect your career and your day to day. They're just going to be interested in your safety and your ability to earn money. And you need to bear that in mind. So I think it's a very dangerous thing to do, to just go to your spouse and say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Right? These are things that should have been hashed out very, very early on.
Mm,
But when they say I need to think about it and talk to my spouse, you just need to make it very clear that they're not armed with the same level of detail that you are, and their interests will not be geared towards, professional fulfillment and things like that. They'll be much more, I think, rooted in survival fundamentals ultimately.
hmm hmm Yeah, interesting point. I think if they're delaying, just challenge them. Try and be empathetic, but you also need to be professional. And it's like we've been in this process 3 weeks. We've spoken about your salary. We've spoken about the career impact. We've spoken about your family multiple times. So can you just help me? Like, what specific information is missing right now that you don't already have? And look, I'm not trying to push you into something that you don't want to do, but we've gone down this road together. We know what we know, and now it's decision making time. You have signaled to me that you're ready to go with this. So just please help me understand this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But the bottom line is control. And then I know you mentioned we sail off into the sunset. Well, don't be that recruiter that closes a deal and gets paperwork signed and then they just turn into a ghost and they're never heard from again.
Hmm
We don't get paid until the rebate point is over, right? And also that person that you've just placed, you're in this industry for the long run. They're going to be a hiring manager one day. So you should be contacting them with the same cadence that you have been throughout the process once they've signed and through onboarding. You should be getting in touch with them all the time and using that new placement as another branch on the tree to help grow
hmm
your influence across the account.
Absolutely. And then one nice little trick that I learned a few years ago on how to handle that late stage uneasiness and delay on the candidate side. Get to the points which they're considering, just question, question, question. When they're thinking about these things, set this arbitrary deadline of when you're going to call them, you're going to talk about them and come to a solution. And if this is post offer, usually the solution is you're in or you're out. So it's like if you wake up and you have anxiety and you just don't think this is right for you, like we can make a decision not to go forward. But if you're feeling good, we we can go in. You've got to keep, in my opinion, you've got to give them some kind of escape route. You don't want to force them into it, but you do need to create a deadline because you do need to be professional. And at that point, if it's post offer, you kind of need to save face a little bit with your client situation.
Final thing I'll say is just like your intuition again is a muscle that you should be training all the time. Like as you get more and more experience in recruiting, for me, it's like your intuition should be a really big guiding tool for you. Like it should be able to tell you very early on, based on what a candidate's posturing, the way that they're saying certain things, you should very quickly be able to tell if this person's going to take the job. And
Hmm.
same on the client side, especially when it comes to like actually qualifying them at the beginning. So work on your intuition. And that's unfortunately why some of those recruiters who are multi-million dollar producers without any systems can sometimes thrive because their
Yeah.
intuition is just at a very high level.
Yeah, the gut feel. Yeah, so what we've learned today, like control is so, so important, but it's kind of like that, and I always say this, it's the iron fist in a velvet glove. You need to demonstrate empathy, you need to show the candidate that you truly want the best for them, but you need to control. You need the iron fist. Like you have to control the process because without any process and without any control, um, recruiting becomes very, very challenging.
Agreed. All right. Well, on that bombshell, guys, cue the music and we'll see you next week for some more client facing stuff. All right, guys. Cheers.